The next day, Massey was too exhausted to get out of bed, feeling as if her whole body had been beaten with a stick. Rudy opened the door and called out, "Madam, are you up? How is your body feeling?" She groaned but still tried to raise her voice, "I'm fine." Rudy looked at her and said, "I will go and prepare hot water immediately." A while later, the hot water was brought in. Massey stepped into the tub, and Rudy took care of her very carefully. "Is the water temperature all right, madam?" Massey smiled, "It's fine." Rudy said, "If you soak in the water, your muscles will relax. Today, you should rest in your room, it's quite cold outside." Massey hesitated, "I was planning to go to the library for a bit. I just want to read a book." Smiling, Rudy replied, "I'll have the fireplace lit in the library first. The magician was absent from the castle yesterday, and it's quite cold now." Massey smiled, "Sorry for the trouble." After a comfortable bath, Massey headed to the library. As soon as she opened the door, light flooded in. Massey thought to herself, "The curtains have been drawn, it's really bright inside." She looked up at the towering bookshelves and swallowed with determination. "What I'm looking for is..." She recalled Ruth's words, "Anatol has been an isolated area for a very long time, so there's no way there could be a high-ranking cleric. His magical power is almost depleted, and by midday, he'll be just an ordinary person. In Anatol, there's only one place for treatment, but they can't be asked to leave their clinic." Massey searched for some guidebooks. There are many magical creatures around Anatol, which means incidents like yesterday's could happen at any time. Therefore, if I learn a bit about healing, I might handle it better next time. But where are the healing books? Since this is the space Ruth always occupies, even a single book should stand out. She suddenly noticed. Over there is a huge stack of books. Massey quickly grabbed a book that caught her eye and joyfully exclaimed, "I found it! This is a book on herbal medicine, and this." Massey then found a slightly different book. "What's this?" She stared at it. "Is this an ancient script? Could it be ancient healing magic?" She mumbled as she read the book. "Boil that thing with fruit peel and let it cool. Oh my, it seems I can read it all. I never thought that hiding in the library when I was young would be useful now. If I can learn all this, could I help them even a little bit?" She looked around. "First, I'll read all these books, note down the ancient words I don't know, and then try to find them." That day, Massey stayed in the library until late at night. Exhausted, she lay on the table, lamenting. "There are so many ancient words I don't understand, the herb illustrations are blurry, and the other books just contain dubious content. Instead of sprinkling powder on bruises, if you have a fever, apply wet egg water? It's so different from the healing methods Ruth told me about." She sighed. "Even though I've worked hard, I haven't gained anything significant. Besides Ruth, if there's just one more person who knows healing magic, it would be a relief. But it will be difficult because Anatol is too remote to request a high-ranking cleric. Wealthy lords wouldn't hesitate to provide support to bring in an excellent magician or a skilled healer. Before crossing the high mountain over there, they would prepare a place to live in a prosperous and peaceful land." She hugged the pile of books. "My eyes are so dry from reading. First, I'll take these books back to my room and continue reading. There might be some essential knowledge in the books I haven't read yet." In the dark of night, Massey carried the books and left the library. A few days later, a maid asked curiously, "Madam, are you going to the library again today?" Massey was startled and looked at her maid. Rudy, feeling awkward, said, "The meal." Then bowed her head and continued, "I will prepare some light snacks to bring up for you." Massey smiled, "Thank you, Rudy." Then she hurried off. Rudy thought to herself with concern, she has been neglecting her meals for several days now. She shouldn't harm her health like this. Inside the library, Massey dipped her brush and diligently took notes. She focused like this for a while until she grew tired and lay down on the table. Massey wept silently, thinking, "It's strange, I've been reading books for several days now, but why does the number of unknown words keep increasing?" Even though she was reading whatever she could, honestly, these books were quite boring. Suddenly, she heard the door open and quickly looked up. It was Ruth, who was surprised to see her there. "Why are you here, madam?" Massey stammered, I was just looking at a few things. When did you get here? What about the injured? Ruth glanced at the pile of papers on the table and replied, I arrived last night and finished treating all the injured. Then he noticed a piece of paper and asked, Madam, are you trying to learn healing techniques? Massey hesitated. Something like what happened a few days ago might happen again, so even if it's just a little, it would be good for me to be proficient. Ruth paused, then smiled. That's a very commendable thought. Ruth sat down and picked up a piece of paper from the table. When did you start learning, madam? Let me take a look. Massey, startled, watched him look at the paper with embarrassment. That's ancient text that I've painstakingly been trying to decipher. Ruth mumbled, I see, so this word means. Massey's face turned red with anger. One day, I'll make sure to teach that wizard that without permission, he shouldn't touch a lady's belongings. Then Ruth suddenly asked, Wait, what? Madam, can you write in ancient script? He stared at her intently. Massey hesitated. I learned when I was young, Massey tensed up as she remembered her father, and said, I read poetry in ancient languages. She couldn't forget those beatings, her father berating her as a disgrace. I gave you a month, and you still can't read it perfectly? Massey spoke in a low voice, but I'm not very good at it. Ruth looked closely at her handwriting, which seemed very skilled. Massey bit her lip, trying to suppress the fear from her memories, because I like reading books, so I became proficient in reading and writing. Ruth suddenly turned to her with a peculiar look, handing her the paper. Madam, why don't you try learning magic instead? Massey was taken aback by the suggestion. Ruth immediately stood up. Yes. Why didn't I think of this sooner? He smiled brightly. Learning magic would be much better than healing techniques. If you could use magic for healing, it would ease my burden considerably. Massey felt bewildered. Isn't he expressing his desire too casually? She bowed her head, uncertain about the suggestion, and responded, I've heard that magic is the domain of the ancient capital. It's very complex and intricate, it's beyond my abilities. Ruth shook his head. That's only true for high-level magic. Common magic is a bit different. Massey asked, what is common magic? He explained, it refers to all the basic, unchanging spells, simple healing and recovery, minor magic like nourishment. Those are considered common. Massey wondered, is that really minor? He smiled, even though you seem fragile, you have the ability to harmonize with mana, you know ancient words, and you've done research, right? It seems you already have the basic knowledge needed to learn magic. If you train for a few months, you could quickly grasp the basic types of magic. Massey, full of hope, asked, can I really learn magic? She stammered, can I actually do it? Ruth shrugged, you have to try to see if there's any harm. In his mind, Ruth was already plotting a new, cunning plan. Massey thought to herself, that's right. Creating magic stones was only difficult at first. Besides, he spoke so confidently. If I can get help, it will clearly be very feasible. She resolved, if you teach me, I will study diligently. Ruth, delighted, exclaimed, that's the spirit. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. He felt he had succeeded in the first step of his plan to lessen his own burden. Standing up, Ruth instructed, then, tomorrow, madam, please come to the library after 12 noon. Massey, feeling confused, asked, tomorrow? He smiled, because I need to prepare some important things for the lesson. Massey wondered, what are you preparing? At that moment, Ruth was rummaging through everything and muttering, where should I look now? Ah, here it is. A pile of heavy books tumbled noisily to the ground. Massey was startled by the sight of the thick books. Ruth explained, these are books on the principles and concepts of magic. Massey glanced at them in horror and realized they were in ancient script. Ruth said, the content isn't difficult. You can understand it all, and reading them in your spare time will help you a lot. She hugged the books. Thank you, Ruth. He looked out the window and said, it's nothing. Then, suddenly, Ruth yanked the curtains shut, closing them tightly. He pushed Massey out of the library in her bewilderment and said, Madam, go outside, or rather, return to your room immediately. Yawning, Ruth shut the door. I need to rest in my familiar spot. See you tomorrow. Massey stared at the door, frustrated. He really is something. As a wizard, he should be more dignified. She sighed as she walked. I need to reconsider. Then she looked up and decided, let's go back to reviewing the books. Massey then returned, walking down a sunlit hallway. Although it was winter, the sun shone down on Anatol, creating a pleasant warmth. She strode through the warm sunlight, a brightly lit window appearing before her. Massey paused, gazing at the beautiful natural scenery outside. She hugged the books tightly and continued walking with determination. That evening, under the dim light of candles, Massey sat in her room, diligently reading. She turned each page, thinking to herself, truly, even though everything is written in ancient script, it's not hard to read. She recalled Ruth's words, although you seem fragile, you've lived and maintained the ability to harmonize with mana. You even know mathematics and ancient languages, almost having the basic knowledge to become familiar with magic. Massey hoped, can I really become a wizard? She imagined herself becoming a powerful mage, if one day she could create a huge fire like Ruth, control the wind and rain, and sweep away the invaders threatening Anatol. She envisioned the scene where Kristen would hold her tightly and praise her endlessly, smiling and saying, I am proud of you. Thinking about that, she happily hugged her books and drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, her heart pounded. Her chest tightened with anticipation. She had never awaited the arrival of the next day with such excitement. She wished for morning to come quickly, thrilled by the thought of impressing Kristen with her diligent studies. She thought, if only it could be like this. The next morning, she was in the library. The board was covered with writing. Ruth shouted, so, the formula defined by this fire ritual conclusively reduces the interference of the world and results in maintaining the lightness of mana in various aspects, becoming the focal point of sustaining magic. Furthermore, in a magical structure built like this, if we apply the supplementary method of the previously developed theorem, it becomes essential. The important parts are the 4 two-step verifications and the 5-step gradual reduction, making it more refined. Massey was startled upon hearing this. Ruth smiled brightly and asked, so, madam, do you understand everything? She desperately lay down on the table. I don't understand any of it, Ruth. He read the book again and asked, tell me which part you find difficult. She stammered, no, there's no part that's not difficult. It's indeed too much for me. Ruth closed the book and said, you're already showing a distressed attitude. Magic is the pursuit of truth by any means. It's a discipline that aims for enlightenment through diligent study. Madam, you must patiently listen to and absorb the specialized knowledge. If you don't understand something, you have to persist until you do and gradually improve. Massey sighed, even if you say so. She stole a glance at Ruth, thinking about the day she would become stronger. She bit her lip, silently resolving to be determined. Massey stammered, I will try my best. Ruth looked at her and sighed in relief, as if her giving up would have caused him great distress. As he wiped the board, he continued, that's good. I will explain everything slowly from the basics. If there is any part you don't understand, please ask immediately. I will go over it again for you. She said enthusiastically, I understand. Ruth thought for a moment about where to begin, then immediately picked up the chalk and started explaining, in the natural world, there exists an invisible force that wizards draw into their bodies, mana. Wizards call it mana, and they attract it into their bodies. Mana exists naturally and is accumulated through training. When it is drawn into the body and concentrated, it is called magical power. Massey raised her hand with a question, aren't they the same? Ruth shook his head, because they are used together, they might seem similar, but if you intend to distinguish them seriously, their properties are different. If mana is the stable energy that exists in a balanced state in the natural world, then magical power is stacked in an artificial manner within a person or an object. In short, you could say it is a somewhat unstable form of energy. Massey listened intently, though a bit confused. Ruth smiled and said, let me explain it like this. Right now, the mana in this space is creating a perfect balance, which we can call a very natural state. However, like this, he snapped his fingers, and a flame instantly appeared in his hand. Ruth continued, now the mana in this space has concentrated into my magical power, breaking the balance that was established. This is magical power. However, this is not a natural state because the flame cannot naturally exist in this space without my magical power. Therefore, nature seeks to return this unnatural state back to its original balance. Magic eliminates magic, compressing it back to its natural state. In short, it strives to revert to its existing state. He then made the flame disappear. Ruth explained, wizards call this force anti-magic. Ruth continued his explanation, based on that anti-magic force, magic cannot be sustained and eventually disappears. Massey listened attentively while taking notes rapidly. Suddenly, she paused and pondered over these concepts, then asked, Ruth, a few days ago, if there was no magic ritual, does that mean magic couldn't be summoned? He smiled and replied, exactly. The flame I just created was also made through magic. He started writing on the board. Even when cooking, if you want to make a delicious dish, you follow a recipe. If we consider magical power as the ingredients, then magic is like the recipe. By some method, in this space, you need to concentrate the magical power to a certain point and create a specific amount of flame. This process is the magic ritual, a technique that is quite specific. Therefore, to become a wizard, you need to accumulate enough magical power in your body and learn how to handle magic precisely according to each spell. What do you think? Do you understand up to this point? Massey hesitated, I understand, but what is the intricate handling of that magical power? What is the fundamental principle of the magic ritual? Because it seems too complex and too difficult. Ruth rummaged through something in his coat and replied, I'll explain that part gradually later. But for now. He took out a small bag, here, please take this. Massey puzzled, what is this? He explained, it's a magic stone, used to operate mana integration ability, with the characteristic of attracting mana around. If you regularly practice sensing the slightest movement of mana around you, your mana integration ability will increase, and you'll be able to sense the movement of mana. Massey was pale with fear at that thick book, it's not basic at all. Ruth smiled brightly. From now until the next class period, you should read through this entire book. It's not written in ancient languages, so it shouldn't be difficult. Massey glanced at the hefty tome in shock. Can I really learn magic? Massey diligently studied here every day. She focused on taking notes while Rudy stood beside her. Rudy silently worried, she had skipped meals for a few days. This could affect the lady's health. Massey stayed up late into the night, resulting in dark circles under her eyes. Rudy smiled, because the weather outside is cold, I'll get the coat ready for you. A little later, the two went outside in winter. Rudy looked around, oh, the temperature seems to have dropped a lot compared to the previous days. Massey nodded, yes, this morning I had to break the ice to get water from the well. Massey looked up at the sky, so that's it, ice, huh? Rudy, is it colder in the mountains than here? Rudy replied, yes, that's right. Massey turned back, how long has the expedition been underway? Rudy said, it's been a week today. Massey couldn't sit still in her heart. Rudy and the others seemed calm, but this unease was her own. Each passing day heightened her anxiety. Could there be a serious injury preventing their return? A malevolent spirit or being trapped in the mountains, sleeping outdoors every day, the cold wind seeping up from the ground, was it really that cold? Kristen, if you were here right now, at least I could melt this cold. 2 days later at Anatol Castle, soldiers suddenly noticed and shouted, look! There it is! They blew their horns and announced, inform those inside the fortress immediately. The echoing sound of the horns filled the air. Servants in the castle immediately stopped what they were doing upon hearing the horns. Rudy looked out the window, oh my, lady, that's the sound of the knights returning. Upon hearing this, Massey's eyes lit up, it seems the Lord has returned. The stone in Massey's hand dropped as she immediately ran off. Rudy startled, my lady, let me fetch your coat before you go outside. The entire castle erupted in excitement, the Lord and his knights have returned. They were all startled to see Massey hastily running out. She stepped outside with eyes full of happiness, the Lord has returned. Massey looked down at the group of knights and couldn't hold back, shouting loudly, Kristen. Upon hearing the familiar voice, Kristen turned around immediately. He broke into a smile, cheeks reddening as he saw his wife. Massey didn't say a word but ran swiftly to embrace him. She held him tightly, surprising even Kristen. He looked at her hand gripping his coat tightly. Meanwhile, Massey silently thought with her head buried in his chest, so cold, the scent of wind mixed with snow, the smell of icy metal. Now, with her face against Kristen's, Massey exclaimed, "Kristen, he's returned." She stammered, "He's back. Are you hurt anywhere?" Kristen said nothing, gently kissing his wife. Massey fell silent, feeling the kiss, both catching their breath from its depth. Then Kristen couldn't help but kiss her again. Massey turned to call him, "Kristen." She noticed nearby soldiers were shocked to the point of madness. Massey was taken aback, only now realizing, had she really run into Kristen's arms in front of everyone? Kristen still bent down to hold her. Massey hesitated, "Kristen, wait, wait." Kristen kissed her shoulder, "Had I known you awaited my return so warmly, I would have burned down the mountain and hurried back to you immediately." Massey blushed and hesitated, "Kristen." She pushed him away, everyone is watching." He remained calm, "I know." She was so embarrassed she almost cried, No, what do you know?" Kristen suddenly looked directly at her shy demeanor. Feeling awkward, he bowed his head to cover his face and immediately picked her up and ordered the knights, "Those who participated in the battle will be exempt from work for a week. I will send someone to serve you, rest well." One soldier joked, "Thank you for taking care of us, Captain. We will disband ourselves. You should turn off the lights immediately." While holding her, he spoke to the steward, "Take good care of my horses, and make sure the children returning from the battlefield eat well and bathe in warm water." The steward nodded, "I understand, sir. I will prepare the bath for the Lord right away." Kristen suddenly noticed Massey's expression and said, "Yes, hurry. I'll eat later. Right now, I just come in to change clothes quickly, get ready." The steward obeyed, "Yes, I will prepare it immediately." With that, he glanced at the blushing maidservants nearby and instructed, "What are you still doing? That's the Lord's order, carry it out quickly." Kristen then carried her to a dim corner of the castle, gazing at every contour of his wife's face and kissed her hair. "Damn, I've missed this feeling so much." Massey touched his face, "Kristen, your body is so cold." He bent down to embrace her, "Cold? No way." Suddenly, he leaned down, making Massey's face flush with heat. Kristen looked at her tenderly, "Seems like my body is melting right now, Massey." Then he continuously kissed her neck and shoulders. "Do you know, Massey, I've never felt more anxious in my life. I need to be inside you right now." Upon hearing that, Massey blushed deeply. Without further ado, Kristen bent down. Massey closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder. Kristen immediately got to work. As he entered, Massey startled, holding him tightly, trying to endure the pain, tears of happiness streaming down her face. The two stayed in the corridor for a long time, surrounded by silence with only each other. That night, Kristen bent down to look at his wife's face. He wiped tears from her cheek. "Damn, did I hurt you badly? I didn't mean to be so rough." Massey hesitated. I'm okay." Kristen kissed her cheek. "That's just your usual response." Massey looked up at him, silently wondering why he cared about her emotions. Wasn't it a husband's right to demand such things from his wife whenever he wanted? Whether he caused her pain or hurt her didn't matter at all. Massey buried her face in Kristen's chest. I'm telling the truth. I don't feel any pain at all." Kristen smiled, holding her hand. "Really?" As soon as she said that, he mischievously slipped his hand down below and whispered, "If that's the case, then now I'll." Massey looked at his hand, flustered and exclaimed, Kristen." Suddenly, someone knocked on the door and said, "My lord, the bath is ready." Massey froze, utterly embarrassed. Could it be that everyone outside had heard everything since earlier? After that, Kristen stepped into the bathtub, relaxing in the warm water. He glanced over at his wife who was hiding under the blanket. Massey shyly didn't know where to hide her face. On side, "I'm too tired to even raise my arms. Ruth, join me for a bath." Massey hesitantly looked away. "You're lying, Kristen." Kristen sighed again. "I slept under the cold dew in the forest for 10 days. My whole body is damp, and my toes are numb." Please help me. Hearing that, Massey hesitated, torn. She couldn't resist and got out of bed, approaching Kristen who was soaking in the warm water. He reached out to her, come here, Massey. She hesitated, if it's just washing, I don't need to get in. Kristen was serious, Massey, I still need you. Hurry up. Massey reluctantly grabbed a blanket to cover herself. Eventually, she decided to drop the blanket and stepped into the tub to begin washing him. The trap was sprung effortlessly. He quickly embraced her, kissing her shoulders continuously. Massey glanced at him softly. Kristen gently called her name, Massey. He kissed her while repeatedly calling her name, Massey, do you want this too? The water in the tub immediately overflowed from having an extra person. Massey let out a soft cry of emotion in the room. The two enjoyed intimate warmth in the warm water. After they cooled down and the tub was emptied of water, Kristen tenderly embraced his wife and they went to sleep together. Massey quietly thought to herself that she could barely move her fingers anymore. Oh, this delicate girl, scrubbing the body of a giant like him, was making her fingers numb. Suddenly, Kristen kissed her back, making her jump. She turned to him, are you very tired, dear? Kristen smiled mischievously, Massey, when you prepare a feast for someone who's been fasting for over 10 days, what do you think will happen? Massey stumbled, I am not food. Kristen leaned in to kiss her again, then what? Why do I find you so appetizing? She blushed deeply at his words. Kristen gently stroked her hair, I've cleaned up the area on the mountain, so we don't need to leave here until winter ends. Let's make this time together beautiful. When the weather warms up a bit, you can ride horses or we can go see West Lake. This winter is truly something to look forward to. Then Massey realized something, but what if you don't need me anymore, Kristen? She slipped out of his embrace and watched him sleep. Fear crept into Massey's mind. What will become of me? The next day, Massey returned to the library. The ink on her writing had smudged on the paper. The servants kept calling, Madam, Madam. It was only now that Massey snapped out of her thoughts. She turned to Rudy. Rudy announced, Lord Dongchu has finished changing, Kristen is ready now. Shall we go? Massey stood up immediately. Kristen looked at his wife, did you sleep well? Oh, I'm sorry for waking up late. I looked for you when I woke up but couldn't find you. Kristen leaned down to kiss his wife's forehead, don't worry about those things. Massey blushed shyly, but letting Lord Kristen sleep alone. He smiled, you don't need to change our routines because of me. Besides, wasn't it because of me that you overslept? Massey blushed immediately recalling the scene. She playfully scolded her husband, Kristen. After the servant left, he kissed his wife's hand, actually, I came here to fetch you. Nervously, Massey asked, here? You meant to go outside? He excitedly replied, not outside the castle, but there's something I want to show you. With a smile, Kristen said, let's go. Massey then put on her robe and followed her husband. She saw 3 kittens nearby. Kristen explained, I went to the farm this morning and found them. Kristen petted Tarlon, is this little one worried? Must have been displaced from its sleeping spot? Massey stroked the kittens, oh my, they're just skin and bones. They must not have eaten well for a long time. Did their mother leave them? Kristen nodded, probably. I asked the stable hand, but didn't see any adult cats around. Should we take them to our room and give them some milk? Excitedly, Massey asked, can we? He draped an arm over her shoulder, whatever you wish. Massey immediately sat down, momentarily forgetting that Kristen intended to embrace her. She said, in that case, I want to bring them to our room. I'll ask Rudy to make a little shelter for them. After that, Massey hugged the little kittens close, thrilled, this is my first time raising cats. Kristen looked at her fondly, really? Massey recounted, because my father didn't like animals much, and we had hunting dogs at home, so I couldn't bring cats inside. I secretly took care of them in the backyard. I could only play with dogs or cats. Memories of the day she hugged the dog came back to Kristen's mind. He hesitated, remembering, then asked, was it a dog? Should I find you a hunting dog? Massey looked puzzled, no need, sir. I have these little ones, they're enough. He bent down to look at his wife. Massey, if you want anything, you don't have to keep it inside. Like when we lived at Christ Castle. No, I promised you a more luxurious life than that. At the mention of Christ Castle, Massey's heart ached. Like when we lived there? She avoided the question. I'm really fine now. If there's anything I want, I'll tell you immediately. Kristen sighed, looking at his wife. They both brought the kittens home and fed them milk. Massey sat there watching her husband take care of the kittens, imagining Kristen as a warm, albeit large, wolf. At that moment, Kristen calmly called her, Massey. He held the black kitten and asked, what should we name this little one? Massey was surprised. Me. I should name it? He looked at her. You've spent a lot of time in the room. Maybe this little one would like a name. Massey defended the kitten. You shouldn't bully vulnerable animals. He gently placed the kitten in the basket. Who said I'm bullying it? She looked at the kittens. The striped one is John, the white one is Laura, and this black one is Roy. Kristen asked, John, Laura, and Roy? Massey explained, those are the names of the fairy tale siblings. A story I heard when I was little. He sighed, why don't we just call them fairies? Sitting there, he watched his wife playing with the kittens, then softly called out, Massey, stop staring at those kittens and come over here. Massey blushed at hearing this, hesitating. Teasingly, he said, I just asked you to come sit here, why so tense? Massey blushed and wondered how he could lie so casually while keeping a straight face. Saying that, she stood up and sat in her husband's lap. Massey quietly thought she felt like a little chicken. The crackling of firewood in the stove created a warm and cozy atmosphere. Kristen's strong and steady hands embraced Massey. She leaned her head on his shoulder, quietly thinking, this is what peace feels like. Kristen hesitated about living in Anatol. Is there anything uncomfortable? Anything lacking? Massey shook her head, nothing inconvenient, nothing missing. She startled when he hugged her tighter. I like it here. She remained silent in his embrace, feeling her own unease. She understood now. Kristen was afraid that life here might not suit a girl from Christ Castle, someone used to being surrounded by affection. And Massey quietly thought, that's a worrying thought. If I told the truth, he wouldn't feel so uneasy like this, but then clearly he. Massey pushed Kristen's hand away, saying, Caleb Castle is a wonderful place. He looked at his wife skeptically, is that so? Massey nodded shyly, it's true. The fortress walls look majestic and sturdy, so I feel very safe. The castle is nestled in the mountains, so it's amazing to see Anatol's landscape from the windows. Everywhere you look, the scenery is beautiful. People are polite and friendly. And most importantly, the chef at Caleb Castle is even better than the palace chef. Everything tastes delicious. Kristen suddenly smiled at her words, because it tastes good? Massey thought to herself, how can I say that I might gain weight from it? She hesitated. The dining experience has been delightful, and there are many magical dishes. Kristen kissed her cheek, I'm glad the food suits your taste. He gently touched her hand, making her jump. Massey leaned against Kristen's shoulder, feeling his warmth. He tenderly rubbed her back, whispering sweet words into her ear. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Kristen sighed in annoyance, what now? The knight outside said, I am Gable Lion. Everyone is gathering in the conference room now. Kristen sighed again, let's go then. The knight bowed, I'll lead the way. The servant said to Massey, Madam, Rudy is carrying a box of items. We're here to prepare for the evening banquet. May we proceed? Right after that, the servants were bustling around, hurrying with the adjustments and prompting each other. No, move the mirror a bit to the left. Yes, that's it, right there. Kristen quickly leaned down to kiss his wife. Massey looked awkwardly at them, barely prepared before the maidservants arrived to try on her outfits. One of them eagerly said, I heard there will be a grand banquet to celebrate the Lord's return from battle. Madam must dress splendidly. Massey looked at the pile of jewelry and gowns, feeling overwhelmed. The maid eagerly asked, How does Madam find them? Massey hesitated and replied, That's very beautiful. Very beautiful indeed. The maid laughed heartily. Exactly, these are all the dresses that I and the seamstresses have put so much effort into. Come on, don't just stand there, try on each set. Madam, tonight's banquet must surely impress the knights. Massey had to continuously try on dresses. One servant suggested. Madam, please try on this emerald green dress with climbing vine embroidery. Another objected. No, try the sea blue one first. Madam, how does it look if we use this pattern here to cover up? Oh my, the flowing skirt looks as beautiful as fairy wings, madam. Here, please wear this topaz ring as well. After a while of trying on outfits, she finally chose one. The maid smiled. All done. Well, this outfit suits madam very well. How does madam feel about it? Massey looked at the dazzling gown on herself, hesitatingly replied. I also think this outfit seems the best. Rudy brushed her hair and said. Now I'll do your hair, madam. Since the jewelry is diamonds and topaz, instead of a veil, it would be better to tie it up. But should we add pearls to it? Another objected. No, after tying up the hair, it would look much better to pin it for decoration. So, a golden hairpin would complement madam's hair color. After a while of fussing around, they finally completed everything. The maid said. All done, madam. Please try standing up and moving around a bit to see how it feels. Massey gazed at herself in the mirror and murmured, oh my goodness. Rudy asked her, Madam, do you feel uncomfortable or is there anything you're not satisfied with? Massey shook her head, no, not at all. Very, very comfortable, I really like it. She couldn't stop marveling, so splendid like royalty. Is this really me? The servants all continued to praise. Sparkling like diamonds, Lord Kristen will surely be pleasantly surprised to see you. He will be very happy. It's truly magnificent. At this moment, a servant brought her a cloak and said, even though there will be a fire during the banquet, the temperature will drop at night. Madam will need this cloak. The maid smiled and handed her the cloak, wishing Madam a joyful banquet. Massey was touched and said, thank you, Colin, and all you. After spending the whole day trying on clothes, evening arrived. Massey walked down the corridor with her attendant. Her white gown stood out vividly in the darkness of the night. As she entered the banquet hall, everyone was bustling with excitement. Massey spoke to her attendant, Rudy. Rudy, you can go back now. Please take care of the kittens in the room. Rudy bowed, yes, madam. Massey watched Rudy depart, then placed her hand on her chest, took a deep breath to gather herself, and started walking into the banquet hall. Ulysses eagerly called out to her. Lady Massey, have you been well during this time? Massey awkwardly greeted the young knight in training. He was excited. Although you've known early on, I've just returned from my first meaningful conquest with Lord Callip. It was the most profound 10 days of my life. Massey stammered, that's fortunate that you could return safely and unharmed. Did you get injured anywhere? Ulysses scratched his head, it's quite embarrassing, I got tangled in tree roots while descending a hillside, dangling there. Luckily, we had a salve made by a mage that spared the expedition any trouble. But I endured teasing from Sir Richard all day. Sir Richard? The one who escaped the battle with the ogres? Massey asked. At that moment, another knight interjected, Lauber, save the commotion for later. First, let's seat the lady. Ulysses apologized hastily, I apologize for my exuberance. Lady Massey, I'm sorry. Massey reassured him, it's all right. He then led her, come, let the lady follow this way. I'll guide you to the best dishes. The roasted pork here is truly a masterpiece. Massey chuckled, thank you, Lauber. Ulysses extended his hand, I will hold the cloak for you, madam. Just give it to me. Massey tightly held onto the cloak, making Ulysses confused, madam? Massey was secretly worried, isn't the dress too extravagant? What if everyone laughs at me? The maids have dressed me beautifully, but if people see me, they might think I did my makeup in under a minute. Summoning all her courage, she handed the cloak to him, here you go. Massey peeked at him, surprised by Ulysses' reaction. Why was he so silent? Did she really look that ridiculous? If someone stared at an ugly person like that. The knight's jaw dropped, exclaiming, "Oh my God, madam! You are truly beautiful, like an ancient goddess. You look stunning in that white gown." Massey stammered, "Really?" Ulysses grinned widely, "You were already lovely before, but today you are breathtaking. You are the wife of Lord Calip, the #1 knight in the world. In this moment, I've lost my soul. Even the proud goddess Nym would blush with envy at your charm." Massey, embarrassed, blushed deeply. "It's not that much." Ulysses shouted even louder, "No, really. It's such a pity. If you had attended the royal ball with this appearance, everyone would have been captivated by you. Those who were ready to pledge their knightly vows to you were lined up outside the palace." Massey nervously whispered, "Please, can you be quiet?" Massey nodded gratefully, but then asked, "Where is Lord Kristen?" Ulysses furrowed his brow and replied promptly, "Lord Calip is still in the conference room. Several knights are discussing the movement of the supernatural creatures." Massey was taken aback. "Movement of supernatural creatures?" Ulysses explained, "The creatures from the northwest suddenly started moving towards the south." At that moment, a familiar tall figure appeared. Massey looked and greeted, "Sir Richard." He grinned, "Lady Massey. It's been a while." Massey mumbled, "A while? It was just yesterday." "Yesterday? How so, lady?" He smirked teasingly. "Yes, you're right," Massey stammered, feeling embarrassed. "More importantly, the supernatural creatures are moving south." "What does this mean?" Richard took a sip of wine and replied, "Indeed. I've seen fishing boats from the north showing signs of migration towards the Anatol mountains. I'm not sure if this will affect the ecosystem of the supernatural creatures, but if these creatures move south, it will impact the entire region. Hence, the meeting to devise strategies with the mages will take longer." Ulysses interjected to explain further, "That's why we returned late to investigate the situation thoroughly. We conducted a detailed investigation in the northern mountain region." Massey tensed up, "So that's it." She continued nervously, "The supernatural creatures." In Massey's mind, horrifying scenes resurfaced from her healing mission: floors soaked in blood, people with bones protruding from their wounds, and the stench of charred corpses. If this were to happen again, it would result in many deaths and injuries. Richard noticed the expression on Massey's face, scratched his head, and said, "I've spoken nonsense. Lady Massey, you don't need to worry about this." Ulysses smiled brightly, "No matter how far these creatures come, the Gendragon Knights will ensure the safety of Anatol. So, lady, don't worry. Try these dishes. This is the grilled wild boar I mentioned, crispy on the outside and tender and flavorful inside." Ulysses described the dish enticingly, "Each bite melts in your mouth. If you cut a piece of this meat and dip it in the rich sauce, it's absolutely delicious, so good that you wouldn't mind dying after tasting it." Massey tried to reassure herself, "That's right, this isn't the time to be sad. I'll focus on what I can do starting tomorrow. I'll dedicate myself wholeheartedly to studying magic. Even if I don't know how much help it will be, it's better than doing nothing." Richard sat beside her, observing her enjoyment of the food with amusement. Ulysses brought more dishes and invited, "How does the esteemed lady find these?" She nodded, "Delicious, excellent." Richard chuckled, "Indeed, we have mountain pigeon and fried cinnamon bread here." He poured more wine for her, "Lady, have this with your drink, it'll be splendid." She accepted the glass, saying, "Thank you." She drank it down, surprising him. "I didn't know the lady enjoys drinking?" Massey replied, "I don't particularly like anything." Richard poured more wine and asked, "Why is the lady so good at drinking?" He continued, "Come on, have another glass." Massey looked at the wine glass in her hand and wondered to herself, "Is this okay? Well, even during meals I usually have a glass or two. It should be fine." After a few glasses of wine, Ulysses suddenly shouted loudly, and Massey's face flushed red. She looked around in confusion as several soldiers rushed over. "Lady, do you enjoy drinking wine?" one of them asked. She nervously explained, "It's not like that." Another soldier brought another bottle of wine and invited her, "Exactly. With such delicious snacks, you can't just have a bland drink. This one will be better for you, lady. If you're the captain's wife, then of course you should drink like this. Massey looked at the large bottle of wine and, feeling a bit overwhelmed, decided to join in. All right, pour me some. Before long, the table was cleared of food. Massey sat there, feeling flushed, and thought to herself, my mood is really good, like floating on a cloud. Massey raised her glass again, and the soldiers cheered enthusiastically. Come on, please finish it, madam, one of them urged. Suddenly, someone muttered, I thought she was a reserved and modest girl, but she has a cute side too. Massey heard these words clearly. She glared and said firmly, I'm not without principles, even though I may seem reserved. Then she raised her glass and downed it in one go. Massey explained, but it's just because I'm not used to socializing with others. She continued to say odd things one after another. Massey commanded, everyone, please lower your voices a bit. Neater, hearing this, couldn't help but quip, it's not because we're tall that madam seems small. And for a young man, if you're not big, what's the point? Neater is happy, it's not too late now. If madam eats a lot and drinks a lot, she'll grow as tall as a pine tree. I hope this captures the essence of the passage more clearly. If you have further adjustments or specific parts you'd like to focus on, feel free to let me know. Massey was surprised, is that so? Can I still grow a bit more? They laughed. Of course, madam, you know. Since I was 13. I drank wine so I am big proof, isn't this what it is? Ulysses rolled his eyes, what was he saying? I don't know the secret of the height of Mr. Knighton? Really? They look around, the kids hold their hands, sir, please pour me wine, soon I will catch you. Massey also quickly drank the entire glass. He raised it, I too. Suddenly, the wine glass in her hand was lost, and that tall figure abruptly appeared before her eyes. Kristen's fiery anger erupted loudly, what are you doing? She innocently laughed, I want to be tall, taller than ever. Her husband immediately glared at the knights, you lot. What were you thinking to make my wife so drunk? Speak up. Nearton scratched his head, it's because madam drinks well, so we got excited. Kristen forcefully slammed the wine glass down on the table, the knights stood frozen, so you mean you used my wife to get yourselves excited? All of you? At that moment, Massey's eyes were heavy, she closed them swaying from drowsiness. Seeing his wife in that state, Kristen sighed deeply and gently carried her, who was now completely unaware of everything. Kristen warned all the knights, today, just eat and drink until you're full and drunk. Tomorrow's training will be tough enough as it is. With that, he left amidst the fearful silence of his men. Kristen carried his wife away from the party room, worry etched on his face. Massey, how much did you drink? These idiots. Suddenly, she looked up and kissed his neck. Kristen, stunned, looked at her foolish smile, then hesitated, Massey, are you just going to sleep like this? He helplessly admired his wife, sleeping peacefully like a child, and muttered, let's see how tomorrow goes.